sources. Wikipedia articles could be a mixed bag, but we got lots and lots of quotes here. So if you will go to the article asking the question, were the ancient Egyptians black? Right? It's called the Ancient Egyptian Race Controversy. Ancient Egyptian Race Controversy. I want to scroll down to the second paragraph. Mainstream scholars reject the notion that Egypt was a white or black civilization. They maintain that applying modern notions of black or white races to ancient Egypt is anachronistic, so out of place time-wise. In addition, scholars reject the notion, implicit in the notion of a black or white Egypt hypothesis, that ancient Egypt was racially homogeneous. Instead, skin color varied between the peoples of Lower Egypt, Upper Egypt, and Nubia, who in various eras rose to power in ancient Egypt. Now,
the idea that the ancient Egyptian scholars don't care about race is one of the most misunderstood concepts ever. First of all, as you can see, they do DNA tests, and as soon as they have the DNA, the first breakdown they have is by race. Secondly, they still study the craniums and the body types and clearly write down what race one of them might have belonged to, separating them in three categories, usually European, Asiatic, and Sub-Saharan African.
let me stop here and say race was not an issue in the ancient world the way it is today. Many would argue that race became an issue because of white dominance trying to argue for the justification of the slave trade a couple centuries back. That race became a way for whites to keep blacks down, that you are inferior.
Race was mentioned by the ancient Greeks, and then it was mentioned by the Arabs in a sort of racist way where they divided and they started targeting black people, making up a word like abid, which means slave. The word slave, abid, also means black, which you can see where the racism was back then. And then, of course, you had European racism later, but this timeline is not the same as what he's giving, but it's close.
It seems that through world history, the bigger issues were not skin color, but ethnicity, where you're from, what group of people you were. And that, for example, Moses marrying a Cushite woman, the controversy was not she's a black woman, but she was a Cushite. It may have been considered inferior or whatever it was, but it wasn't because of skin color. So that's a modern construct that we're putting on things. So I'm just going to read through, scrolling down the article. I'll start. These are all Egyptologists and Egyptian scholars and things like that. Barbara Mertz wrote in 2011, Egyptian civilization was not Mediterranean or African, Semitic or Hamitic, black or white, but all of them. It was, in short, Egyptian. Catherine Bard wrote in 2014, Egyptians were the indigenous farmers of the Lower Nile Valley, neither black nor white, as races are conceived of today. Federico Pulgival and Albert Connerl wrote in 2017, there are defenders of the theory that the pharaohs were black, and there are those who maintain that they had Caucasian origins. Neither theory is provable. Nikki Nielsen wrote in 2020, ancient Egypt was neither black nor white, and the repeated attempts by advocates of either ideology to seize the ownership of ancient Egypt simply perpetuates the old tradition, one of removing agency and control of their heritage from the modern population living along the banks of the Nile.
Okay, so what's going on here? What he's talking about is the middle of the road way that ancient Egyptian scholars describe the controversy of ancient Egypt. This is just a list of ancient Egyptian pharaohs one by one, and will show you that the facial features of the ancient Egyptians are clearly black Africans. And think about it in your head. If you saw these statues and I told you that they were found in Sweden or someplace like that, would it change your view of them? Especially the first one that I showed, which was Huni. The reason why the black scholarship idea of ancient Egyptian has such validity is that they're not in Europe, they're in Africa. They look African, they have features of Africans. And by the way, the image that I'm showing you right now and the images that I showed you, they're not cherry picked like how the Eurocentrics or the people who go with this middle road go, where they pick specific pictures. I just went to the earliest pharaohs that have statues, and this is what you see. This is what you see when you search up ancient Egyptian pharaohs earliest. This is what you will see. This guy's called Huni, Huni. Look it up.
And on and on. Now you say, but I can show you quotes from scholars who say they're black. Yeah, the issue is that people have devoted a lifetime to studying this, studying skeletal remains, DNA evidence, looking at the iconography, the pictures, and linguistic descriptions, and everything else are divided. That's all I want you to understand, that top scholars who have devoted a lifetime to this, who can read Egyptian hieroglyphic, who understand the cultural background and things like that, who are experts on Northern African and civilizations and Middle Eastern civilizations, and on, they differ over this, but many say that Egypt was not homogeneous color-wise, and that many would say it looked, in ancient times, the way it looks today, which is multiple different peoples of multiple different colors.
The idea that ancient Egyptian scholars are these varied, crazy people with multiple ideas is actually a very strange one. It's actually a very simple thing. Most ancient Egyptian scholars are actually pretty biased, and that's because ancient Egyptian scholarship has not gone through a transformation. You can see with the image I have on the screen that if anyone was honest, they would say that is not a European by any stretch of the imagination. But they don't, because there is no honesty in the ancient Egyptian scholarship of this time. The people who vary in answers only vary because they do not respect anything outside of the mainstream.
So there's a useful article on just a convenient blog. It's not by a scholar, but it's just a convenient blog about tales of times forgotten that asks about how ancient Egyptians looked. And it's called Were the Ancient Egyptians Black? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my way through a number of texts here. Let me just grab my notes here. I'm just going to make my way through this. And here we have an illustration of Mahepri from his copy of the Book of the Dead showing him with black skin. So here's an ancient Egyptian who's clearly depicted as black. All right? No question about that. Now let's go to another.
I was tempted to leave this just hanging, but maybe I should address it. Keep in mind that these scholars, just like this guy, say that the ancient Egyptians, you can't judge by their race. You can't sit there and say that they were black or white or whatever. But then when they see a jet black person, they go, yeah, clearly black. So here's my question. Can you judge the ancient Egyptian statues or not? Can you judge the art or not? You can't say you can't judge the art, and then as soon as you see a jet black person, you go, yep, definitely black. You said that the concept of race didn't exist back then and they couldn't judge it. So what are you doing?
Another one. This is a picture. It's somewhere between a picture of ancient statues, somewhere between 2649 and 2609, depicting Prince Rahotep and his wife Nofret. So he is light brown skin and she's white skin. Now this is ancient Egypt, okay? I just want you to see this, some of the diversity. And notice also that generally men are painted with a little darker skin than women because the women were inside more. So it's fascinating to look at. He's got light brown skin, she's got white skin.
I've done a breakdown of every single queen in ancient Egypt by skin color on my channel. And if you look at it, every single queen is dark brown skin. So this idea of these light skin exceptions, it's just a waste of time. And of course, most of these light skin exceptions have to do with religion or something like that. But they're not even worth going into at this point, considering that 90% of the queens of Egypt are portrayed with dark brown skin. Same as the men.
Okay, here's another one. a painting from the burial chamber of Nefertiti, dating between 1298 and 1235. And again, she is light brown skinned here as well.
This one is exceptionally stupid. First of all, the woman that is being portrayed is not Nefertiti, it's Hathor, the goddess, who is always portrayed as yellow because the skin of the gods was yellow. Secondly, if you want to see what Nefertiti looked like, here's a picture. Guess what? She's brown.
Another image, light brown skin image, a man hunting from a tomb painting around 1350 BC. And then the one that's the most interesting of all, it's a 19th century illustration of a Book of Gates fresco from the tomb of Seti. So he ruled 1290 to 1279. It shows on the left, you have someone who is pale skinned, and he stood for someone from Libya, which was in Africa. Next is someone who was actually black skinned, and he stood for someone from Nubia. And of course, there were many Nubians in Egypt. The next is a pale Southwest Asian, pale skin, and then the last one is a light brown skinned Egyptian. Isn't that interesting? So the Egyptian is different than the Nubian and is different than the Libyan and the Asian.
I was waiting for him to bring us up this image. He actually didn't mention something that is actually very obvious about this image. Notice how the Asian people and the North Africans are portrayed almost identical with skin color and their hair. And then notice how the hair of the Nubian and the hair of the Egyptian are portrayed almost in the same way. He's not going to mention that part. He's going to mention that the ancient Egyptians are lighter skinned than the others. In Nubia, which, sure, the people in Nubia were darker skinned, but that's because they were a slightly different type of African than they were to the Egyptians. But notice how their skin color is closer together than they are to the Asiatic people. And the most important point, the guys who are light skinned, if they were the same race as the Egyptian, why are they not tan? All four of these people live in the desert. So there should not be some light-skinned North African or light-skinned Middle Eastern. They all live in the desert, and if they have their shirts out, they should all be the same skin color.
It's just very interesting. And then the famous Beni Hassan tomb painting, which shows Semites who are coming into Egypt, and the Semites are light brown skinned, and the Egyptians are dark brown skinned. And when you look at pictures of Egypt from 200-300 years after the time of Jesus.
I'm glad he made this point, honestly, because if you can see, the tan thing falls to the wayside when you take the Asiatics and put them right next to the Egyptians.
And you've got these portraits and things like that. And there's one after another back on that article. I mentioned Tales of Times Forgotten. You got the whole diversity. You got people who look white, people who look black, people who look Middle Eastern, people wide ranging. The features, the skin color, wide ranging.
The wide-ranging skin color of the ancient Egyptians can simply be explained by looking at two different Africans. The Nubians would look like the ones who are very black-skinned that you can see on the side, and the others might look like the woman on the other side who's a Khoisan. More likely, there were Bantu people who would have been lighter skinned than the Nubians, but yeah, saying that there's two different skin colors doesn't mean that they're from two different continents. Anyway, class dismissed. Subscribe.